Good morning and welcome to the Killik & Co podcast. This week the news has been dominated by Hurricane Harvey, and we've been looking at the economic cost of this and the effect that it's had on the stock market. If you have a look at this picture here, it shows the same road in the US before and after the hurricane hit, and I think it does quite a good job of illustrating the amount of damage that has been caused. Now, it's very difficult to estimate the cost that a natural disaster can cause, but there are a number of different ways of looking at this. One of the main ways is to look at the insured cost. So this is the amount that insurance companies have to pay out to cover the cost of buildings and other physical assets. But the actual economic cost does go far higher than this. If you consider the amount of time that is lost because people can't go to work, the money that is lost because shops and restaurants are closed, damage to crops, and also the disruption to demand and supply. This chart here shows the total cost of a number of recent natural disasters. The tsunami that hit Japan in 2011 is considered to be the most expensive natural disaster ever to hit the world, and the total economic cost of that is thought to be in the region of $229 billion. The most expensive disaster to hit the US in recent history is Hurricane Katrina back in 2005. The total cost of that was thought to be about $176 billion, and of that the insured cost was about $82 billion. At the moment, economists are still trying to estimate how much Hurricane Harvey could cost, but the general consensus at the moment is that the total cost will be about $50 billion, and of that, about $20 billion will be insured. So if insurers are having to pay out $20 billion, that's obviously bad news for insurance stocks. If you have a look at this chart here, this shows the S&P Property and Casualty Index, and it shows that insurance stocks have declined quite notably since the start of the hurricane. It's not all bad news, so even though insurance stocks have declined, there will be some companies that could potentially benefit from this. For example, battery companies and generator companies could do quite well, and also companies that could be involved in building after the hurricane has passed and we can start to reconstruct any buildings or infrastructure that needs to be repaired. Perhaps also specialist recruitment companies who would be involved in recruiting builders to take part in this repair work. So, as I said, not all bad news, and some companies could potentially benefit. Texas is heavily involved in the oil industry, and it's quite interesting to look at what's happened to the price of oil since the hurricane hit. Now, there's not just one price of oil, there are a number of different benchmarks that we follow. The main one for crude oil is called Brent crude, and that refers to oil that's produced in the North Sea and around the Atlantic basin, and that accounts for about 2/3 of the world's crude oil supply. The other major type is called WTI, or West Texas Intermediates, and that's a type of oil that's very similar to Brent crude, but it's produced in the US. So these two types of oil do tend to have a very similar price per barrel. Now, what happens with oil is it's produced or extracted by the ground, and then it's sold to refiners or refineries who make that oil into a usable product. So it's really the refiners who are setting the price for oil and creating demand. Because of the hurricane in Texas, a number of refiners around the area have had to close. Therefore, they're not able to buy oil in order to refine it. Therefore, demand has fallen, and therefore we've seen the price of West Texas Intermediate falling. So if you have a look at this chart here, you can see that over the last year, the prices of Brent crude and West Texas Intermediate have been quite similar, but since the hurricane hit, Brent crude has stayed the same, but West Texas has fallen quite considerably. So at the moment, the price of a barrel of Brent crude is about $52, but for West Texas Intermediate, it's only about $47. So there's currently quite a wide spread between those two types of oil. So that refers to oil as a raw material. Something very different has happened to the finished product. So obviously oil is converted into petrol or gasoline. At the moment, because less of that is happening in the US, there is concern about a petrol shortage, and therefore we have seen quite a significant spike in the price of gasoline. This chart here shows that we've had a 20% spike in the price of gasoline since the hurricane started. So that's it for our summary of the effects of Hurricane Harvey, but obviously the situation is still ongoing and we will be monitoring it closely. Moving on to the week ahead, it is the start of September, and we would expect things to start getting a bit more busy. We have got a number of companies reporting this week, particularly the house builders. So I believe we have 4 house builders reporting next week: Barclay Group, Bovis Homes, Barratt Development, and McCarthy & Stone. So we will be watching closely to see what those results are like. That's it from us. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next Friday.